do you think, like, if even if you were that animal, like, would you want that to happen to you?
I think if humans weren't the dominant species and I was proposed with that opportunity, I would care about how I was treated in life, but I would be okay with my product being used to support those around me.
Okay. Well, I mean, do you think that, like, I guess, yeah, because we kind of have, I guess, dominated these other species, or so to speak. But I guess, like, do you think, like, the might makes right kind of in that scenario? Like, it's just because we kind of have the power to, we should do these things?
Should and can are very different. I agree. I see what point you're putting towards that.
The pink, or yeah, that's probably fine. I don't know.
The blue.
Okay. Oh, the blue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you step in?
Sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
All right. That should look. I think that's good. All right. So we are out here talking today, kind of about dynamics, sort of between, like, powerful, or like someone who maybe has power versus, like, someone who doesn't have power. Like, do you think someone who's maybe more powerful than someone, whether that be they're stronger or smarter, or they just have the capabilities, to kind of, I guess, dominate or oppress someone else, do you think that's fair? Like, should they do that?
I think it shouldn't. I think they shouldn't be allowed to dominate. I think somebody who has more physical or mental ability to do something has a certain responsibility to take care of people who don't. But I never think that it should be a one-way power stream. I think responsibility should be shared between the people, and having a singular person ruling over any particular person, it's not in human nature.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think that was a good kind of way you put it. Like, someone maybe who, like, does have more power kind of has, like, a responsibility, like, to use that power, maybe not to, or, like the saying goes, like Spider-Man, like, with great power comes great responsibility, right? So kind of use that power sort of to, for good, rather than to oppress or, like, exploit or harm someone else. So I kind of want to ask, shifting it, I guess, kind of away from humans, how do you feel kind of, like, about the animals, for example, that, like, us humans kind of have power over, like, that we kind of, like, send into slaughterhouses or use for, like, medical testing, or, like, in entertainment, like zoos, for example? Do you think we're kind of, like, oppressing them?
I think oppressing would be the incorrect word to describe that, because an animal has no ability to give consent. So even doing something that would be necessary or beneficial for an animal population, they can't say, yes, I agree to it. So oppression wouldn't be the correct use of that word, but definitely exploitation. I don't think it's appropriate to force an animal to do something that doesn't benefit them. And I think that there should be a certain level of restrictions when it comes to things that will benefit other people, like animal testing.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously, it's understandable to an extent, like when we're testing vaccines and things like that, we can't just automatically go for it, because at the end of the day, you will always prioritize your own people over another life. It's not blatantly evil to do so, but there should be better restrictions put in place about what you can and cannot do to an animal, and what you can and cannot justify when harming an animal,
Yeah. Do you think, because you kind of said, like, they can't consent, right? Do you think that kind of makes it, like, not necessarily fair? Like, because they can't necessarily consent to what's happening to them. So in a way, we are kind of just, like, using them, like, kind of like we're deciding we're going to use you, right? And they don't really get a say in that. Like, maybe they're not exactly human, right? Obviously, but they are sentient, right? They have like a subjective experience. So in that sense, should we be using them? And, like, do you think, like, we necessarily have a reason to be using them? Like, in 2026, maybe when we have alternative, can't speak, like, methods to certain things, like food, for example, or, like, entertainment. We obviously don't need to use them for, like, entertainment, or, like, clothing. Like, do we need to take their skin from them or their fur? Like, do you think we need to be doing these things to animals?
I think generally speaking, yes, because things like faux leather is significantly worse for for the environment and thus worse for the animals. Things like logging horses cause significantly less damage when being used than machinery. Hunting dogs and sport dogs, you can't expect them to just live their lives miserable because they were bred to do a certain purpose. It would be our responsibility to continue to let them do those things. But I think, again, that there should be more restrictions to it. I mean, I will take a leather jacket over a faux leather jacket any day because I understand that it will last longer. It is less environmentally impactful. It is better quality material. It's just the understanding that the animal did not suffer for that, because if an animal is killed for the purpose of using that animal's product, so long as that animal didn't suffer, it was going to die regardless. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for people to still be using animals, and a lot of it is to benefit the animals and the environment as a whole. But I do think that there should be many more restrictions on the meat industry, and that what is going on in mass production is absolutely heinous. But sustainable farming, I think that is appropriate. Like, when my neighbor kills one of their chickens, I do not feel guilt for eating that chicken. But if I get chicken from the supermarket, I understand that that chicken was not cared for, that it did not live an appropriate life for that species. I do feel guilt about that.
Do you think, though, I mean, well, because, or you said you, like, do kind of think we need to use animals, but, like, I guess, you know, kind of like, if you were to, like, I guess it's maybe hard to, like, I guess put yourself in their shoes because, you know, you're not an animal, right? But, like, if that was you, if you were to kind of switch places, do you think it would be fair kind of for us, like someone to come to you and be like, I want to use you, you know, because like, even hypothetically, like, I don't know all the research about, I've heard some like back and forth between like whether leather is more sustainable than like faux leather. I don't have all the research off the top of my head, so I'm probably not the best to debate that right here. But from an individual perspective, do you think it's like fair to do that to them? You know, because like obviously they don't want to, you know, they don't want their skin to be taken from them. They don't want to die, you know. So like if we have alternative methods, and whether that, you know, is more like, it's kind of not speaking necessarily even just sustainability at this point, just like whether it's fair to do that to another individual. Do you think, like, you know, if even if you were that animal, like, would you want that to happen to you?
I think if humans weren't the dominant species and I was proposed with that opportunity, I would care about how I was treated in life, but I would be okay with my product being used to support those around me.
Okay. Well, I mean, do you think that, like, I guess, yeah, because we kind of have, I guess, dominated these other species, or so to speak. But I guess, like, do you think like the might makes right kind of in that scenario? Like, it's just because we kind of have the power to, we should do these things?
Should and can are very different. I agree. I see what point you're putting towards that. But at the current moment, because you can say ignoring the sustainability practices, but you can't ignore the sustainability practices when that is one and the same when it comes to animal conservation, when it comes to animal welfare. You know, having the sustainability practices is a large part of the argument and cannot be disregarded. And for that reason, I think that it's not generally okay to do these practices, but it is reasonable and expected that until we have something that is genuinely better for the environment, that is genuinely better for animal welfare, that it's okay that we continue to have these practices if we just do it more ethically, if we consider individual animal needs when doing these practices. I mean, I'm an ecology major. I spend a very, very large part of my life dedicated to better understanding these practices of animal welfare, of animal consumption, of animal products. I know that it's not always going to be ethically sourced. I understand that ending a life early for the sake of a product is, in the essence of nature, not okay, but I don't see it that much different than being a predator. I mean, is the end goal just to extend animal lives as long as possible? Is the end goal to have domestic species go extinct in general? At what point are we saying that we're doing this for the animals, and at what point are we in fact just doing it because we feel guilty about it? You know, it's a very fine line right now.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, like, I guess a perfect world, I guess I would propose, like, I guess, a vegan world, would be, you know, to where we just don't even necessarily use animals in any sense of the word. Like a lot of these farmed animals, right? They're domesticated species. They're not even like natural, you know, species like that you'd even find in the wild. They've been selectively bred over time to produce, like dairy cows, for example. They've been selectively bred over time to produce, you know, like 10 times, I'm not sure the exact number, but like, you know, a bunch more milk than they otherwise naturally would. Or like sheep, for example, they've been bred to overproduce wool, because sheep naturally would, you know, just shed their wool like in the warmer months. But now we have to do it for them because over time we've selectively bred them to, you know, continue to grow more and more wool. So I think like in that sense, I guess like an ideal world would just be where we don't, you know, use animals in any sort of way. And like if we were to say like diet, for example, shift towards a plant-based diet, we'd actually be able to free up 75% of our agricultural land. So I mean, that is, I think it's the size of North America and South America combined. So that way we'd be able to rewild a bunch of wild species. Because like right now, currently, speaking of like mammals, I believe it's 96% of like mammals on Earth right now, the global biomass is farmed mammals, compared to 4% only being wild. So I mean, if we were to free up or stop farming these animals and free up that land, we'd be able to, you know, rewild species and like I guess reforest a bunch of land. Because I mean, also animal agriculture is, I believe it is the leading cause or driver of species extinction and deforestation. So I mean, in that sense, we'd be able to, you know, rewild a lot of these wild species. But the point being is that we wouldn't necessarily be having these like domesticated animals anymore, because we wouldn't be using them, you know, necessarily for like a benefit. We'd kind of be just letting them, you know, live and be, you know, do their thing. And like, I understand like if the world was to go vegan overnight specifically, we'd run into some problems, but like obviously the world's not going to go plant-based or vegan probably overnight. So like gradually, as the demand kind of decrease for these animals to be bred into existence, to be used, you know, the number of animals would decrease. And like I said, we'd be able to, you know, rewild and reforest a bunch of land, and it kind of gradually return to that, I guess, baseline. What do you think?
I think that this is a conversation that happens a lot. I would like to see more propositions on how to go about that, especially with a lot of cultures being connected to the animal industry, and to erase that would do erase the cultures. And right now, that's one of the larger issues that we're having right now, is understanding other humans as part of our own community. I mean, but long term, that's, you know, it's an ideal scenario. I mean, you can't expect to do a mass culling of animals, especially because of large carbon emissions that are happening from the farming industry right now. I mean, that's a very large issue. But yeah, long term, having it maybe not go vegan, but be selective about it, having it be a smaller industry, or even just run by the individuals. If the farming industry turned into a local-only thing, like where individuals own farms again, like, for example, at the starting of this country where individuals own farmland, that wasn't really problematic. That wasn't as much of an issue. So maybe not go vegan per se, but having the entirety of these industries be pushed back onto a local level would be an ideal world.
Yeah, I guess I would disagree a little bit, only because from, I guess, the perspective we're talking about, kind of it kind of goes back to that, like, is it ethical? Like, for example, like with clothing or like leather, like let's say we can find, it's something I have to research more into, but like if we can find alternatives that, you know, are sustainable, that aren't animal skin or whatnot, or, you know, we can get maybe other, or make clothes out of, I don't know, like just other things like plants or and whatnot. Do you think, like, ethically, you know, if we're able to find alternatives to stuff, like, do you think we still should be, because like even if you give the animals like high welfare or like the best life, at the end of the day, you know, they still want to live, they still have a preference to live, and that's still, you know, like a life, right, we have to take. And if we don't need to do that, you know, then like it makes the question, like, should we?
I mean, at the end of the day, everything dies. And though I love that we're looking into these alternatives, I think it's important to focus on the now because that's where we are. We need to worry about what's going on right now within our communities and within our animal welfare practices. So we need to figure out an immediate solution while we figure out a long-term solution. They should be coinciding with each other, because, again, nobody wants to die. It is the most bare minimum instinct that every sentient creature, in particular, particularly sapient creatures, have. But when I do die, my body will be used to help other individuals to continue to be sustainable. And, eventually we'll have replacements for donor organs, but we're thinking about the right now. After I'm dead, I can't change my mind on being an organ donor. I can't consent after that. An animal can't consent after it's already been killed, and it will eventually die either way. So if, say, and this is purely hypothetical because I think basing an entire opinion on one singular example is kind of not great, but if a cow, a Brahmin, were to die of old age, would it be ethical to use that leather then to help clothe the people of that village that the Brahmin was being raised in? If that Brahmin was killed preemptively, would it be the same ethical treatment? Would letting a Brahmin die of old age potentially miserably, potentially sickly? And would it be different if it was a euthanized because of an illness rather than a euthanized because of its materials and then used for the materials anyways? I mean, it's such a complex topic with so many variables, and talking about it like it's a singular issue it doesn't really benefit anyone, including the animals,
Yeah, I think like you said, the difference kind of, I think, between us and the animals, like specifically, like let's say when we die and we're able to, we can consent, like, right, like I can be like, I want to be an organ donor, right? Like I'm consenting to letting you use my body kind of after I pass on. I think the difference though is the animals, they can't really consent. Like obviously not when they're killed, but like even before, like, they're not necessarily on the same maybe cognitive level, like to where they can consent to something like that. So I think like I say, it just begs the question, like, do you think like, because these animals can't consent, like, should we be then using them? Because like, then again, it is kind of going against their consent, right? Like, like they're not really able to decide that for themselves. So it's like, we're kind of just deciding, we're going to use you. And like, I think like, you don't necessarily have to view humans and animals on the same level, but it's like, obviously we're not going to view it right for like, do that to a human, like in that situation. So like, what kind of makes it right to do it to like an animal? If we both can have this capacity for a subjective experience, right? Maybe it's not quite on the same level, but if it's there and they can suffer and feel, pain and fear and all that, or they can even like experience joy and happiness, what kind of gives us the right to take that away from them if we don't necessarily need to?
I think the question should be, at what point of intelligence and development does a species decide that it is the deciding factor of whether something should live or die? Because there is so many different levels of intelligence, and to say that we are blatantly higher than anything else is somewhat true, but also a misnomer, because we have entire species that we know have their own language, have their own culture, and they choose to kill other animals, sometimes for entertainment. At what point of emotional and intellectual advancement do we get to decide what is ethical and not ethical? At what point do we get to decide that killing a rabbit for its meat is not okay? At what point do we get to decide that using this material is unnatural in our abilities? I mean, we're separating ourselves from the circle of life when we have these discussions, and that's okay in a general sense, but it's not okay long term. If we separate ourselves from the planet, then it's easier to ignore the planet in general. I mean, that's an issue that we're having with a lot of people right now. Does the rabbit consent to the wolf eating it? I don't know when it stops being an issue and when it starts being an ethical dilemma. I think that's the question.
Yeah, I mean, they can't, obviously, I mean, they obviously don't consent to that, but like, I wouldn't say we like look to necessarily like wild animals and kind of base our morality off that. Like, for example, like lions, they can commit like infanticide or like eat their young, or like, I feel like as humans, we've kind of removed ourselves from that system, and like, we kind of can understand, or like even each other, like for thousands of years, we've killed each other. done other things to each other that we can now recognize like we shouldn't do that, right? That's like wrong to do. So I think in that sense, it's like we probably shouldn't be looking to these animals to like kind of base our actions off of, and like considering that, you know, we've built this kind of society, or we have options like going to grocery stores or farmers markets, right? Or maybe not everybody in the world, right? But like just, you know, like me or you or, you know, other people here, like if we have the option, do you think like we should choose one that like isn't causing someone to be exploited and harmed?
When there is an option that doesn't have someone being exploited and harmed, human or animal, then yes, we should choose that. But as it doesn't exist right now, I'll go back to my original point, secure animal welfare rights more intensely than we have it right now, as well as workers' rights, because the animal industry is equally harmful to the animals as it is to the people slaving away in those factories. We should be focusing on that. When there is an option that doesn't exploit someone, absolutely go for it, but it doesn't exist right now.
Right, no, I agree. Like, I mean, obviously, it's, pretty impossible right now to, like, make any decision where there's not going to be some kind of harm. Like, I totally acknowledge that. Like, you know, buying produce, or I guess maybe not, like, maybe if you come here, you can maybe kind of avoid, if you buy produce from, like, a local farm, maybe there's no exploitation in that.
I don't feel bad about eating this.
Yeah, or something like that. But, you know, going to the store, or like buying produce, or I don't know, rice, beans, whatever. Like, obviously there's going to be some maybe worker exploitation in that. But I guess kind of what I'd push back, like the animals, it's like kind of like more so it's like it's kind of direct that they're the ones being like, you know, having their life taken from them, and you know, they're the ones kind of, I guess, paying the price for that action. Like, but with like these other industries, maybe there's exploitation, but like, you know, maybe can't necessarily avoid that. Like if someone doesn't necessarily have the option to go to like a farmer's market, but I feel like if they are in a store, they can choose between, do I want to cause like an animal directly to die for this product that I don't necessarily need? Or, you know, could I choose another option that maybe there's some harm involved in it, but it's not causing someone necessarily directly to, you know, be bred into existence to be then exploited and killed?
Yeah, again, it's when the resources are available that we should be pushing to always be picking the ethical high ground. But when I go to the grocery store, you know, when I don't have the extra income to be coming to this market, buying some steaks, buying some ground beef is significantly cheaper and within my budget than getting enough vegetables and enough canned goods to actually sustain me long term. I will prioritize my ability to get the right vitamins, my ability to afford to get the right vitamins and minerals that I need in my diet. But if I have a little extra cash and I can afford to give it back to the community and get my meat ethically sourced, I'll go for it. But we don't always have that option, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there actually was a study done by, I think it's Oxford University. It went over a list of diets. I'm not sure all the diets it used, but it actually found that vegan or just plant-based diets were actually 30% cheaper than most other diets. So, I mean, like, if you really look at, like, the staples, kind of like rice, beans, lentils, bread, stuff like that, you know, it's all pretty cheap, and, like, you can find that in stores. So, I mean, you know, going to a store, you could just... You don't necessarily have to eat, like, the fancy mock meats, or, you know, like, buy Impossible meat, or, I guess, you know, all the other, you know, kind of know what I'm talking about, like the fancy kind of vegan meats they have. You can just kind of eat those whole food, plant-based staples. And have you ever kind of, like, looked into, like, plant-based eating in, like, terms of, like, going, like, oh, I could get all these nutrients in, you know, or that I need, you know, eating these? Like, have you ever kind of looked into that, or, like, maybe talked to, like, a dietitian or, like, a nutritionist ever?
I can't afford to talk to a dietitian, but I have looked into those sort of things, and I do occasionally switch over to a plant-based diet when I have the opportunity. But, you know, prices do go up in the winter, and the Oxford study that you are talking about, and it was Oxford, only really observed it for about half the year, and prices do shift around. So when it is in a more of a cold season and prices for vegetables go up, meat prices do become more affordable for the average person. And there's also an expectation that a lot of plant-based things, you have to prep more, and that's not an issue for most people. But like, for example, my sister who has EDS, she can't always physically make those meals for herself, and it is just easier to use something pre-processed that's going to have animal products in it. And that's not saying that should be a major contributor to this argument, but every aspect of life should be considered, and we don't really have time to go over through that. I mean, you didn't bring notes with you. I don't have notes on me either because I didn't expect to have this conversation. So I guess I'm more so asking what your long-term goal for this conversation is. Like, is there a specific point that you're trying to make, or are you trying to broaden your views on how you can approach this issue that you're discussing?
A lot of reasons.
I mean, honestly, we're just kind of out here talking to people. We just kind of want to see like where people's, I guess, principles are at, and like maybe see if they have some that kind of align with us, and like just get people to think kind of maybe about be more conscious of choices they make, because animals, right, they don't have a voice, right? They can't really speak up for themselves, and a lot of these industries, they're hidden from people, so people don't necessarily understand what they're paying for or contributing to. So we just want to raise awareness and like get people to think, and like obviously ideally we would want people to go vegan, right, and like not fund these industries. But like obviously one person coming and talking to me, I'm not expecting a person like, oh, we're having one conversation, you're going to go away and like automatically be vegan. No, obviously maybe some people, but not everybody, obviously. So we kind of just want, have a dialogue and talk to people and just get them to kind of think about it more. And we have a resource card that if you're interested, I can give to you at the end of this. But just to look into it and like, kind of consider, something that maybe they haven't considered before, and like think, just kind of about the animals and like, oh, is that something I really want to pay for? Like, and just if I don't need to pay for these things, if I can live my life, not funding this, and like, do I need to or should I? So just kind of getting people to think, and yeah.
All right. Fair enough. I think that's a well enough point to make. I think doing this is a lot more effective in your cause than fear-mongering-esque ads, because it's not that the meat industry is being hidden from people, it's just that they're not really looking, and when the only exposure they have to that is sort of horror movie-esque looking ads that are trying to tell you how scary it is for the animals, people aren't going to look at it like that. People are going to say, this is dramatic. So just releasing basic studies, doing individual conversations where you're not trying to have an end goal of this person turning vegan or looking up into something, just having normal human conversations is better for the cause you're going for. And I think it's good that you're out here doing this in a way that isn't aggressive, isn't forceful. And I enjoyed having this conversation. And I think that my moral standings have been presented to you, that we have shared what we have in common, that we have shared what we could have shared within the time that we are allotted right here. And I think that, again, these conversations, they're important, more important than getting people to be vegan.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I won't lie to you. Like, obviously, the ideal is we want people to be vegan because, we care about the animals and we're speaking up for them, and we don't want them to be exploited, right? And we're trying to, get that point across, like that. If we don't need to, should we? But like I said, like obviously coming here, I'm not expecting people to necessarily go vegan, like literally off one conversation. Like again, ideally, yeah, sure, maybe that's the goal long term that we want, but like, it's just unrealistic for me to assume that like one person having a conversation on a random day I'm going to change their entire world. Obviously not. But, like I said, that's why we're out here talking about it, opening a dialogue, and like I said, have the resource card to give to people, and that maybe they'll look into it, or just even look into it for themselves, even not even just our card, but just in general, and just, hopefully just make more informed decisions and kind of come to that conclusion on their own. So yeah. Well, I think the conversation's probably at an end, but it was nice talking to you. I appreciate you stopping by. What was your name?
My name is Raymond.
Raymond? Well, it was nice to meet you, Raymond. I'm Nick. Would you be willing to take the resource card, or no? All right. Well, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I appreciate you stopping by.
You have a good one.
You too.